Today is Honor of Peace Sunday, and we lighted our peace candles, so I thought it was an appropriate time to hear a story of an actual happening that proved that through peaceful measures, changes can be made at times. It's titled, "There is an Island" by Jean Fritz. Once long ago in the far, far north, there lived a giant who had such long legs that he could cross from one continent to another in a single step. So one day he put his left leg firmly on the coast of Siberia. Then he stretched his right leg and stretched it until his foot came down on North America. And there he was straddling the Bering Sea. Below him he saw the sea, big but empty. What it needed was an island. So he reached down. The giant scooped up a handful of mud from the bottom of the sea and began squeezing the water out of it. He squeezed and squeezed until it was dry as any island could be, and then he planted it in the emptiness. Not in the middle. No, he placed it closer to the left leg, close to Siberia. Later, the island was called St. Lawrence Island. But the people who live there have always called it Sivukak, which in their language means squeezed dry. The people in the squeezed dry place are Yupik Eskimos, and although their island belongs to America, they live so close to Siberian Yupiks that they speak the same language, share the same customs, often have the same names. Over the years, they have visited back and forth as if they were part of one big family. They have sung together, hunted together, danced together, and traded together, American chewing tobacco and walrus hides in return for reindeer pants, alder bark, and wolfskin ruffs. And every June or July, the men from St. Lawrence and the men from Siberia would get together to race and wrestle with each other. The races started as soon as people from Siberia arrived. The men ran around in a circular track, around and around, until one by one they had to drop out, and at last only the winner was left. Then a St. Lawrence man took off his parka and went to the center of the circle and squatted. This meant that it was time for wrestling, and he took on anyone who challenged him. One by one they entered the ring. But as soon as a man was knocked down, he had to quit. The champion was the last one left on his feet. The training for this competition was so fierce that one might expect fights to break out, but they didn't. The people in St. Lawrence honored peace above all else, and the elders on the island made sure that peace was kept. The elders were used to settling arguments whenever they occurred, winter or summer. They ordered the contestants to wrestle or vie with each other in lifting heavy rocks, and soon arguments were forgotten and hasty words forgiven. It was the same during the competition when the Siberians were there. If tempers began to get out of hand, the elders only say, "Enough." So everyone stayed in good spirits, and at the end of the contest, all were ready for feasting and fun to begin. They played games, ate, and danced together. And they sang. Long, long into the summer twilight, they sang the old songs they all knew. The elders were considered the wisest and most important people on the island. After all, they were the ones who had seen the sun first and welcomed it back most often. So the elders were the one who made sure that all the ceremonies were carried out properly. On an island where the sun goes down and stays down for most of 8 months of the winter and comes up and stays up for most of the 4 months of summer, and where life itself depends on what can be taken from the sea. Because whales are most important to the survival of the Yupik people, there are special songs. Before a whale hunt begins, certain rituals to be followed when a whale is captured, and when it is finally beached. Some of the whale must be returned to the ocean. Some water from the ocean must be brought to the whale. For like all life, whales have spirits and must be honored. Indeed, Yupiks felt a kinship with the whale, the walrus, and the seal. Do they not all share the same cold waters, fight the same storms, know when the ice comes and when it goes? Of course, some things changed over the years. The islanders, who in the early days lived in caves dug in the hillsides, moved to houses made of walrus skins, and finally to small wood houses provided by the government. Airplanes came to the island and an airstrip was built to receive them. In countries far away there were wars, and finally in the early 1940s there was a world war with warships even in their own sea, and with their own men signing up for the National Guard. Yet the Yupiks remained a peaceful people. One thing they thought would never change. Nothing could stop them from visiting back and forth with relatives and friends in Siberia. Yet there were changes in Siberia too. The day came when St. Lawrence men visited Siberia, found Russians, white men, in the Yupik villages. Some were policemen dressed in uniform who walked about with rifles and billy clubs. The Siberians told their island friends not to worry. When they saw a policeman, they should shout, "Trastubu," in Russian. This was simply a greeting, but to the islanders it sounded like a password. "Trastubu," they would shout, no matter how far away they were. This seemed to keep them safe, and they visited as they always had. World War II was over in 1945, but the Siberian Yupiks and the St. Lawrence Yupiks may not have paid much attention to the fact that their two countries were not friendly anymore. Then one day in 1948, the school teacher, the only person on St. Lawrence who had a radio, heard some astounding news that had to be passed on quickly to the islanders. The Russian government had passed a law which denied anyone the right to enter Siberia or even Siberian waters. Furthermore, no one from Siberia could leave Siberia. At first, the people in St. Lawrence could not believe such news. How could it be? Had someone forgotten to say the password? But it was true. The international date line was the point that no one was allowed to cross. Some St. Lawrence men claimed they could tell where that line was. The water was ruffled at that point, they said. And then it was Monday, and when it was Monday on one side of the line, it was Tuesday on the other side. But from now on, they would be stuck in St. Lawrence time, and the Siberians would be stuck in Siberian time, with never a word of greeting between them. It was like telling the spring birds not to return next year. All they could hope for was change, but change did not come. Instead, there were military units in Alaska with their guns ready to turn on Siberia if necessary. And in Siberia, they supposed it must have been the same. After a while, the islanders gave up racing and wrestling for basketball. Still, on clear days, when they looked across the water to the Siberian hills, they were heart-sick. 10 years passed, 20, 30. Now only grandparents and the elders remembered what it was like in the old days, but they told the young ones. Then as 40 years approached, everyone agreed that this was just too long. Soon even memories would go. What could they do? Some of the islanders had already joined Eskimos from northern Alaska, from Canada, and from Greenland in an Arctic Eskimo organization, the Inuit Interpolar Conference, to try to persuade the world to make the Arctic a nuclear-free, non-military zone. They knew it might be impossible, but sometimes people had to work for the impossible, didn't they? Still, they needed the Siberian Eskimos to work with them. Many people in Alaska agreed to help. They wrote letters to the Russian government. They talked to the people who talked to other people who in turn talked to people in important places who could say yes or no. Alaskan and children wrote notes to Siberian children, attached them to helium balloons, and let them loose over the water, hoping they would float over into the next day. Finally, the Russian government said yes. One plane load of Eskimos could come for one day to the town of Provodenia on the Siberian coast. It was to be called Friendship Flight 1, and surely that meant there would be Friendship Flight 2 and 3 until maybe people could stop counting. On Tuesday, June 14th, 1988, the flight took off. Of course, everyone was excited. Ora Golagergen, a 72-year-old elder from St. Louis, hoped to meet a friend she had played with as a girl. Darlene Orr, who was in her 20s and too young to have met any Siberians, knew she had relatives somewhere in the area. In Provodenia, not just Eskimos, who made up a small part of the population now, were celebrating, but the whole town. Russian school children waited for Friendship Flight, waving American and Russian flags and holding up banners with messages of peace and pictures of dogs. Ora found her childhood friend, but they laughed and cried so much that later she couldn't remember what they had said. Darlene and her aunt, Nancy Walunga, who also went, discovered that their relatives had been relocated to a nearby village, and they couldn't go there. Instead, they were invited to tea with a group of local Yupik women. Darlene's aunt had brought tapes of Yupik dances, and when she played these, the women clapped in delight. Although the kitchen was small, the women jumped to their feet, lined up, and danced the old dances together. Then they sat down for a bowl of reindeer meat and a dish of raw fish. From beginning to end, the day was a success, but best of all, there was promise of more. Perhaps soon the Siberians could bring a plane of Eskimos to Alaska. Perhaps St. Lawrence Islanders could make the trip to Siberia by boat. And yes, perhaps the Siberian Eskimos would be allowed to send representatives to the Interpolar Conference. For Darlene Orr, the good news was that she would be invited to the other town for their annual whale hunt. Later in the summer, when she arrived, she found that she was suddenly part of a huge family, all with the same last name. And there they were in Siberian Beach, all of them speaking the same Yupik language as if they had grown up together. Nothing can bring Yupiks more joy than catching their whale, and that they did. Not only is it their food for the winter, it is their victory over life, in a place where life is hard to live. Standing on the beach with her new family, watching the traditional ceremony, Darlene felt lifted beyond herself. She was one with these people, one with all people, one with the land and the sea and the sky, which all people shared. At a time like this, one could believe that anything was possible. Not only peace through the Arctic, but peace throughout the whole world.